Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear me? Just let me know in the chat if you can hear me. I'm hoping that's a yes. Great. My name is Lisa Malvin, and I am the Assistant Director for Professional Development Programs here at the Graham School. Before I send it on over to Tyler, I just wanted to give you some tech help. We're going to make sure that you guys all stay on mute as we go through, and then at the end we'll leave time for questions, and then you can unmute yourselves and ask questions or just use the chat for questions. Also, if at any point you want to turn off your video, which I imagine you will want to, which I will also do, you can just stop your video at the bottom and then you can start it or not. I'll mostly turn off your video just because we get a lot of people who don't realize their video is on. So if you want, you can always turn it off. Keep yourself on mute. If you have questions, use the chat function. And then if you have private questions, you can always private message me. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and kick it over to Tyler. So thank you, Tyler.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Tyler Huff, and I'm excited to be with you to talk about combination of networking, LinkedIn, relationship building, and a whole slew of other things that you signed up for. So I'm going to just go ahead and start. Oops. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. Oops. All right, so hopefully you can see the screen. Yeah, okay, great. So today, perfect. We're going to be working through some ideas of how is it that you build relationships. So how do you sort of acquire those new contacts, meet new folks? What does it look like to schedule some sort of follow-up, as well as talking about how to continue those relationships. So we'll dive through. We have about an hour or so to talk. There's going to be definitely plenty enough time for questions. So I hope that you have them. Feel free to place them in the chat box throughout the conversation, or we'll definitely get to them at the end. Let me see here. So I partner with the Graham School to lead the That Talk On series. It's a series of professional development webinars that are focused on providing you with both the background information around a specific topic, as well as actionable skills that allow you to leave the session with some steps moving forward. So they focused on networking on LinkedIn, and now we've combined those plus some other things about mastering the follow-up and taking those next steps. A couple years ago, I started the Jefferson Group that provides sort of strategy consulting, professional development, and partnering with the Graham School to develop this program. So if you have any questions or thoughts around that, or interested in bringing some additional training to your company or having ideas, my email is also listed at the end. You'll see here at the middle of the screen, if there's something that stuck with you or spoke to you during the session, I hope you'll engage with me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and use the That Talk On hashtag. Just a helpful way to see sort of where those conversations are. So feel free to use that throughout the conversation today. Today we are going to, again, provide a brief introduction, which we've already done. I have a couple questions to get a sense of who's on the line, what you're hoping to get out of the conversation today. Do a brief and yet a deep dive into networking and building those conversations and building those connections. We'll talk about how to re-engage existing contacts. So I've developed this model that we'll walk through that hopefully engages most folks with where they are, what they're hoping to learn. Share some examples of some specific text of how you can use this as you're going out and talking with these folks, as well as some examples that I've used it with. And then some steps and ideas around how to craft your own plan, how do you move forward, as well as some general tips and creative ways that you can engage existing contacts. So we'll get to that at the very end. But that's where we are for the roadmap of our plan for today. So right now, if you could actually go to this web address, and I posted it in the chat box, so it's there, so if you want to pull that up to you, but it's menti.com, it's menti.com, and enter this code. It's 207528. Just a couple quick questions to get an idea of where folks are coming from. But so if you want to go ahead and do that now, and you can find that in that chat box while I navigate to the new screen. Great. All right. So this is the first question that we have, and hopefully everyone can see this. Here we go. So looks like people are in the space. And great. And so you can see what's coming in. And so this, I think, is just an idea of trying to get a sense of what I can talk about, what skills people are trying to learn, and I can tailor the conversation today a little bit more. So basically trying to figure out why you network. And you're probably going to be networking for a number of these reasons. We're wanting to build relationships for a number of these reasons. But I would say that these are the primary ways, or what is your primary motivation for networking and building relationships. So it looks like most folks are just trying to get to know folks and meet new people. But it looks like there's a nice healthy distribution across all of the different options. And we'll definitely dive into more of that. So the next question is, so this is the way that I've broken it down that will fit into what we talk about a little bit later. But basically, if you think about that you need most help in making those new contacts, so how do you meet people, how do you network, that you need the most help sort of going from meeting new people to scheduling that coffee. And then sort of the last option is re-engaging existing contacts is, maybe you met someone at a networking event, you met for coffee, but you're not quite sure where to go with them. Maybe it's been a couple months or a year since you've been in touch with them. So what are some tips with that? Okay. So it looks like, again, a nice distribution, but most folks, sort of the two primary camps are making those new contacts. So what are some ways that we're going to be able to talk about that? And certainly re-engaging existing contacts. And so what I will say is that the bulk of today's conversation will be focused more around following up with new contacts and re-engaging existing contacts. Lisa, if you could share the link to, I know that the first webinar on networking, I believe that's what it was, from the fall, talked a lot about making new contacts. So if you could share that link, or I'm happy to pull it together after. I think for those of you who are interested in making new contacts, we'll find that also helpful. So there's some more substantive actions and items in that presentation, but definitely I'll talk about all of these today. Great. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to the last question. Some of you already have gotten to, but basically, what are the things that you came to this session hoping you'd learn? So learning strategies for networking, follow up with people from networking events, follow up interview, networking. Great. So engaging that existing network. So that is all sort of great to hear because that's what I came up with. So those are some ideas that I had. So it's good. It's nice to hear that we're on the same page. New techniques for cold calling, emailing people, and then let's see here, scripts I can use when communicating. Yep. So that's one of the things that I know when working with Lisa and designing these programs is really how do we make this as easy for you to carry out the networking and reaching out to folks. So one of them is sort of templated language that you can use. I know that can be sometimes confusing, and when I first started out, I wasn't quite sure how much to share. Do I share enough? And then how strong do I make the ask? And I think ultimately that is dependent upon your comfort level, but you'll see some more of that. Follow up after an interview. Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hop back into the PowerPoint. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Okay, so I think it's helpful in, whenever I attend webinars and talk to different speakers or listen to them, I always was curious to know the way that they approach their content, right? Because you can do a whole bunch of Googling, you can read all sorts of articles, you can read books, you can read magazines, you can talk to a whole slew of people. But ultimately, the personal experiences greatly influence the advice that they give. And that's certainly true for me. And so I just wanted to share a couple things that I bring to this conversation today, and certainly bring to the advice. And I think that's helpful, and hopefully you find that too. So with that, the first step is you just have to start, right? And hopefully after today and after doing some additional research on your own, that you'll know where to start. This is something that is an iterative, ongoing process. But again, if you break down these larger items into smaller tasks or smaller items, by starting today or starting tomorrow, and then adding in different milestones along the way, it will help you get going. The next one is that building relationships, building connections, networking, it oftentimes seems very transactional, which is something that I hate, that networking gets that type of rap, because networking is so much more than that. And so I think it's really important to have the mindset or the approach that you might not have a job offer or a business lead or a really strong connection even after that first coffee, that first interaction, or even the first couple interactions. And that's okay. And then it might come down the road where you've invested some time, the other person has invested some time, and you got what you needed from that connection. But it's not something that's going to last forever. And that's okay too. We'll talk more about that. This next piece is focused on learning. So when I think about these informational interviews, these coffee chats, the way that you're expanding your network is that not everyone is going to be able to offer you a job, and not everyone's going to be able to offer you a lead or even make an introduction to someone else. But if you're able to focus on the types of questions that you ask and focus on your conversation, on obtaining something from the conversation, whether it's a book that you should read, or a strategy or something that you should perhaps approach, or a way that a specific company or firm does business, or a team within a firm does business. So I think if you focus on that piece, that can be really helpful. Again, not everyone wakes up every morning or even every day and is an expert on how to do these things. It takes time. It continues to take time and work for me. So even though I'm giving this presentation, I'm by no means an expert. I continue to work at it. And I've definitely gotten some things wrong. And a fair amount of the time, the inquiries that I send out, or the connections, the follow-up notes to people that I've met at networking events and different connections, they don't get responded to. And so it might seem like I have all of the answers, and I might, be the networking guru 101 in building those relationships. And I think I like to think that I do a good job of it. But again, it's not that it's going to work 100% every single time. When you do make those mistakes, or when you do have those issues, or you think that, I wish I could have handled this conversation differently, just laugh it off. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some mistakes and learning from those mistakes, but don't be too hard on yourself, again, because the idea is that you're not only supposed to be building relationships and those connections, but that you're supposed to enjoy getting to know people, because at the end of the day, it's people connecting with people, and we all like to talk and have conversations. And lastly, in the be curious piece sort of goes back to the focus on the learning. So in these interactions, it's important to want to focus on asking questions. So there's a rule that I like to think about, that the majority of the time you're the one who's listening, being curious about the other person. And so coming up with those questions and really, asking follow-up questions that you might not have prepared before. So those are just some pieces that I hope that you'll find helpful in sort of setting the stage or preparing you to talk about networking and follow-up. So again, diving into more of the networking pieces, those of you who are interested in how do you develop those initial contacts will probably find this section the most helpful. And really, I think this quote I ran across it as I was doing some research, but networking is the art of making and utilizing contacts. And I think that's perfect for helping set the stage for our conversation today. And I say that because it's a both and piece, right? So you can go to a networking event and you can meet a bunch of people, and you can either give or receive a bunch of different business cards. That's technically networking. That's technically making connections. You can follow with people on LinkedIn. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's how can you engage those contacts? I'm not the biggest fan of the word utilizing, because it sounds kind of like using, which has a negative connotation, but you get the point of how do you engage, how do you activate, and how do you work with those contacts, both to help yourself, and then certainly how do you help them? That's an important other half of the coin. But again, I really like this quote for setting the stage today. So we're thinking about growing your network. With the first one is, I found that helpful to join organizations, go to events, and or join groups. So a couple of these for me. So my work is primarily focused around in the global or international space, as well as in education. So, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is an organization that I sign up for their news list. And so I get all sorts of information about events where I can go and meet similarly minded people. And so this is just one example. LinkedIn groups are another one. So I encourage you all to join the UChicago alumni group, the Graham School alumni group, and to like those pages, and like your own alumni groups. Those are great ways to have already a common connection. And then you can also attend different events that are related to your professional industry or your interests. Mine happen to intersect, and so that's why I mentioned the council's group. Professional conferences, different types of professional development opportunities. So Graham School classes that many of you have taken are a great way to network, to build those connections. Again, looking for some mutual threads that are already established, and then any type of professional development societies that can help, again, be focused on your specific area. And again, I think all of these, the common theme for me, at least in understanding them, is using a common thread or having the cold call seem less cold, so a little bit warmer, by having some of these established threads or connections. And again, if you sign up for newsletters that different organizations have, or if you sign up for magazines, this is a great way to learn about different opportunities to become engaged, to meet new people, as well as to attend some of those events. So hopefully this is helpful in getting your mind wrapped around where you can go to meet new people, where you can go to learn about events and different programs. So a brief overview on LinkedIn. Again, there's a whole slew of things that you can learn about LinkedIn, and there's definitely been another webinar that we did on that. I know Lisa has a bunch of resources if you're curious about LinkedIn, but just a couple quick pieces. So LinkedIn has over 500 million users. I think the statistic is that they have like 40 million active users per day. There's a lot of people that you can connect with. It is a tool to engage in virtual networking. So I know that some of you participate in distance learning programs and are not necessarily based in Chicago. So you can certainly connect with folks in Chicago. You can use it to connect with people really anywhere in the globe, as long as they have a connection or they have a profile. And so I think that's really a nice tool, is that you might not always have to engage with them in person to develop that relationship. As I was doing some research, I found someone refer to LinkedIn as a supercharged resume. And there's this one question that I've gotten a few times, and especially when I work with some clients, is thinking about, is it a LinkedIn? Is it a resume? Is it a portfolio? What is it? And so I like to think that you should have a more updated LinkedIn profile than an updated resume, because more people can access your LinkedIn profile and less people are going to see your resume, unless if you're actively shopping it around. But it's more likely that people are going to find you through LinkedIn, or they're going to confirm what they find in your resume on LinkedIn. And especially given how information has grown and how easy it is to share information about yourself and people to find it, LinkedIn is really a great resource for that. And then lastly is that you want a captivating headline, and then you also want a professional photo. So headlines that can be your specific title at your company, or if you're a student, graduate of this program or a student in this program. I prefer 3 or 4 words or 1 or 2 short lines that describe more of who you are and what you're about. So you can head over to my LinkedIn and check that out. Maybe it's, project manager with experience in IT software, whatever the case may be, or, digital marketer looking for whatever it is that you're looking for. So you can really use that to your advantage. And what I found is that, because that, at least for me, my curiosity is, I see a headline that is a little bit different. So I click on that person's profile to investigate it and explore them a little bit more. So it might increase your opportunity to connect with new folks, as well as your profile views. So as you think about going out and building your network, I have a couple pieces of advice here. The first one is you should start slowly. So, it might be easy to want to start adding everyone on LinkedIn, start emailing everyone. But I really encourage you to start slowly and thinking about those intentional people that you want to connect with. And then certainly personalizing your invitation. So LinkedIn gives you the option to add additional context or information to your invitation. And that's really helpful. I think, one, it shows that you're not just someone out there who's sending off these random requests, but that you really care about building a relationship with that person, and it shows that you're going above and beyond. And then lastly, what I've found is that there are people on LinkedIn who are connections of connections, so second or third connections. Someone who I don't quite know and I haven't met, or maybe I have met, but I don't know them well enough. And so I don't quite feel comfortable asking them to connect with me. So what I'll do is I'll follow them. So you can see here is an example of a follow-up note as a way to encourage someone to schedule a coffee with you, someone you've already met. And then here at the bottom of the screen is an example of how you can see in someone's profile the follow option. And so actually I follow a bunch of people, and not just, the big moguls who are the LinkedIn stars, but a variety of people in my own network and my networks that I'm not as familiar with. So again, I encourage you to do that if you don't feel that you're able to exactly, or you don't feel comfortable extending that offer to connect with them. So there's a couple different approaches as we shift gears from the sort of how do you make and build new connections to how are you engaging these folks. And so I think most of you hopefully will fall into one of these three buckets or many of these three buckets, but this is a way that I just prepared it as a way to break this down to make it a little bit easier. So this is what you might consider as a cold call, or you're engaging with someone you don't know. So you're reaching out to them for the first time through LinkedIn, through a call, and I've got some approaches for that of how to exactly do that. So sort of the first stage. And the second one is focused on a follow-up. So maybe this is someone that you've met in person or connected with on LinkedIn, or some other situation, but you don't quite know them. So you're following up to continue the conversation, to schedule that coffee, to schedule that informational interview, and that's the second stage. And then finally this third camp, as I'll call it, or this third approach is how do you re-engage some of those existing contacts? So these are folks who you've met with or had a call with, you've met before, and are really focused on trying to continue to develop the relationship, reaching out, even if there's not necessarily a specific purpose to the why you want to meet. But we'll get into that. All right. So in this first category of engaging, so these are the folks you probably have had no contact with, but something about their profile or something about them in general sparked your curiosity. So when you're going in to engage these folks, there's a couple different things that I think it's incredibly important that you start with. So one, and this is going to be consistent throughout the rest of the presentation and pretty much all of my advice, is that you need to start with a purpose. So what is it about this person specifically that you want to, why that you want to engage them? So is it to have a pitch your company and pursue a sales opportunity? Is it for an informational interview? Is it about a job? Maybe it's all of it wrapped into one. And then the other thing is that people have a lot going on, and I think that time is one of the most valuable resources that we have, and as we continue to be distracted by so many things, people, I think, are becoming more protective of their time. And so you have to specify the amount of time that you're asking, right? So it's much easier for someone to say yes when they say, all right, I know that Paulo wants 30 minutes of my time to discuss, my work on this specific project with, with this specific technology. And so by scheduling and asking for a specific amount of time, it makes it easier for the other person to carve out that time and say yes. I think a common approach that I don't think is as successful is, would you like to get together in the next couple of weeks? So that's one example, right? Fine question, but I think it's more specific, or it's better to ask that, would you be available for a 30-minute call or coffee in the next 2 weeks? So again, being as specific with why you want to meet and then the duration of that. And again, I have some examples of this, but you want to specify any type of relationship. So again, why is it that you're reaching out to this person? Maybe it's a connection that you already have, that someone encouraged you to contact them. Maybe you both went to the same university, or whatever the case may be. It's something that can help also entice someone to accept your offer. So here's an example. So dear so-and-so, I'm reaching out because I saw we have a mutual connection, or a connection in common, and I'm interested in learning more about your work. And then here I just made up a position and a company. And then again, I specified the ask to a 30-minute call or coffee based off of schedules. And then I included that because LinkedIn has a specific character count. So this example should fit into there. And again, that's just an example. And here's what it looks like in person. So I am finishing up my master's degree at Northwestern, and part of my master's research, I need to interview people. And so I did some bunch of searching across various websites as well as LinkedIn, and I found Eileen, who was part of the process for the specific university that I was studying for my research. So in this, you'll see that I specified why I'm reaching out to Eileen, why is she the most important person to help me with this. And then I also put a time limit on the amount of what my ask was. And with this, again, I ran out of characters here, but you can see that the ask is both specific as well as states the relationship. So Eileen worked at the institution where I was studying. This next step. So what is the follow-up? So this is the next idea for folks who you have engaged, have had some sort of conversation with, and you had a good conversation and want to continue it as you move forward. So in this follow-up, typically email or LinkedIn requests, reference how you met. So whether it was met at an event or someone introduced you or someone encouraged you to reach out to them. And then again, going back to that specific purpose, the why. What is it about this person, this connection, this relationship, and how much time do you want from them that will really help you move forward with that. So you can see another example, and feel free to use these. Lisa will send her on the slide deck when it's done. But dear so-and-so, I enjoyed meeting you at this event or at this place, following up to see if we could schedule a 30-minute coffee in the next week or two. And this was just one example, but you can add your own time duration or time span with this to continue the conversation. You can also mention what you discussed and or what questions you have. So that's another option. I decided to leave that out to keep it brief. And then you're offering to handle scheduling. And again, that's something that I think is helpful. Another example of something that I did following an event, hi Morgan, it was nice meeting you earlier at the week at this specific event. And I then went on to say what I wish we could do more of and schedule a conversation schedule a coffee to continue the conversation. So again, hopefully this is an example of both. Here you have like the language that you should use, and this is what it looks like if you were to adopt it to your own life and your own practice. And then finally, we are at sort of this final stage of re-engaging. And at this point, I hope that in these relationships, that you're sending thank you emails after meeting with these folks, that you are having those conversations and you're taking notes. And when it comes to re-engaging or having these conversations with people you already sort of know or have met before, I like to think that the conversation should be somewhat easy, somewhat natural. I have some questions listed at the end that might be helpful for that. But really, if you have and take notes based off of your conversation from the last time. So maybe a quick note of, this person, Sally shared that their child was doing this, or that they were closing up and wrapping up this big project, or they're going on a trip. Something that you can remember about your conversation. I think that can be helpful as you want to re-engage them. So with this, and I have some more examples, but basically here, again, I cannot stress enough the purpose of why you want to meet and being able to communicate that. It makes it both clear why to the person you're asking for their time, why you want to have the conversation and why they're why it's specifically them. I think depending on how you engage them and make that ask. So, most people will think that they should reach out to schedule a 30-minute coffee with someone you haven't talked to in a year, and then in that conversation ask if there are any openings at their company. But you haven't talked to them a year, and the conversation, you might not have had any communication with them. And so then I would probably rate that conversation cold or lukewarm. So depending on how often you engage with them or what that initial relationship looks like, my advice is going to vary a little bit based off of the sort of the heat or the temperature of the relationship. So cold, lukewarm, warm, and toasty are just sort of 4 categories that you can think about how often you engage with them. I would say folks you haven't talked to or had any communication with in 6 months to a year plus would probably fall in this latter category. Some folks that you maybe follow on LinkedIn and they post or you like or have communicated with something in the last couple months, some sort of interaction that might be warmth. And I would say the toasty folks are the people that you've seen or had some type of substantive conversation with them or interaction with them in the past 60 to 90 days. So I would say that one is probably going to be where you can make that direct ask, but you might have to schedule a couple conversations with the folks who are in this cold or lukewarm category. Again, you should make the ask specific, 15, 30 minutes, depending on the relationship, depending on the temperature scale. You may want to ask for more, but again, you'll have a best sense of what that is. And then again, connect with them on LinkedIn. If they're on Twitter, follow them on Twitter. And that's when you can like, you can share, you can repost all of the work that they're doing. You can comment, and this will give you a better idea of how to move some folks from this cold and lukewarm, these two categories, and move them into the warmer, toasty area for that engagement. And this way, when you go out and ask them for a 15 or 30-minute coffee, it might not seem as cold or as abrupt. So with that, I'm going to take a moment and check the chat to see if there's anything that, okay, great. So nothing quite yet, and that's cool. So here we are sort of going to go through the next steps of how you can, what this actually looks like. So, oops. So this goes for all meetings, all types of outreach. Again, you know, it might seem redundant, and I'm not making it that way, but you need to know why you want to meet with this person, why you want to talk to these people. So the goals for the conversation. Is it that you just want to make the connection? Is it that you want to ask them a specific question or have advice for them? Is it that someone recommended that you meet with them, and then you can figure out, you can talk to that person who made the recommendation? Is it to talk about what it's like to work at this specific company? Do you want to learn about their educational background? What is that goal, or what are the goals for that conversation? Prepare 3 to 5 questions for the meeting purpose. So, you know, if you are looking to learn about what it's like to work on the product development team at X firm, then craft your questions around, you know, what and why. So like, what is it that this person in this role does on a daily basis? Are there challenges that they've overcome? You'll have some more direct understanding of what those questions should be. But again, come prepared. And that leads into this next question, is that when you ask someone to tell you about what their work or what type of work that the job that they have, you should already know going into that meeting and that conversation, what they do, where they work, and use your research about their employment as well as their education and type of civic activities that they're involved with to help guide the questions that you have that you're going to be developing here. So again, that's just important that you come prepared. Because no one likes having their time wasted, and certainly no one wants to have to answer questions that are redundant or things that you could have learned ahead of time. So again, just some pieces of advice. So these next couple slides are going to talk about how is it the advice that I have for having that conversation, some different strategies. So again, sort of in that cold call, someone accepted your invitation or accepted your offer to chat. These are just some general pieces, and this will, again, general advice that will go for all of it. But, you know, be on time. And if you're running late, to communicate that and give an accurate estimated time of arrival. So, you know, if someone runs into transit problems or whatever the case may be, I think people understand that you might be late, but just communicate, you know, I'm 5 minutes late, I'll be 10 minutes late, or actually I think I'm going to be much longer. I'm sorry, we have to reschedule. I think when you're beginning these conversations with people you don't really know, start with some conversations about, you know, how their day is going, you know, where do they live in the city or wherever they're commuting from, and begin those conversations that get them warmed up before you dive into some of those more substantive conversations. At this point, you should have your elevator pitch down. Maybe it's a little bit expanded, maybe it's a minute, 90 seconds, but both relevant to the person you're meeting with and the conversation you're having. So that's another one, is that your elevator pitch should pretty much be ready. You have your questions all set that we've talked about in the previous one. You have those 3 to 5 questions based off of your research. And then lastly, you really want to thank them. So they're taking their time out of their day to come and speak with someone they might not know well or might not know at all. And so thank them, you know, before you leave the conversation, and thank them via email or however you're connected. Maybe that's LinkedIn. And I encourage you to use what I call it as you language. So, you know, one way to thank them, and this is totally fine, but not as powerful. So a common response or a common thank you might be, you know, thank you, Patty, for your conversation today. And I enjoyed hearing about your time working at Boeing, for example. Another option that I prefer in using the you language model is, you know, thank you, Patty, for sharing your experience at Boeing. Your insights into the company really gave me a new perspective. So really focusing the conversation around and starting with them, or the you pronoun instead of focusing it on sort of more passive language. Again, just some examples. These are some sample questions and having that initial conversation about how to get to know them. So how did you find yourself? And this is more of the informational interview style, but there are some other questions that I'm happy to share that are more focused around pitching a product or asking for a job or things like that. So how did you find yourself in this specific industry? What is your day-to-day like? I recently saw that you acquired the firm. Basically, this third point right here is just that you've done some research and have an idea of what's going on in their practice. And maybe that you weren't part of that acquisition or that announcement of that launch, and so you can ask them about that. And then this last one is a question about professional organizations. And so I think this is helpful in someone who might be a peer or more senior in your industry and giving them the advice or asking for the advice of where to go from here in terms of wanting to learn more. And then another one that I really like is, you've been incredibly helpful. Are there other people that you'd recommend reaching out to that you might be able to introduce me to? And oftentimes, people are willing to do that. So that's sort of with the first cold call, sort of the engaging category of folks. The next one is following up. So again, when you meet someone at an event and you want to follow up within 1 to 2 days, I would say within 24 hours. But some people it might be okay, depending on the event, depending on your schedule, 48 hours after that. And then again, these conversations should be really focused on the relationship and not so much making that ask in the first part of your first time meeting with them. So giving more than you might be getting in this initial part. And you also want to give first. So you want to give more and you want to give first. You want to offer to connect them. You want to offer to help and really be able to learn about what they have going through. And then as you go through that relationship and go through the conversation, there's definitely an opportunity to share what you need help with and definitely make that ask. But again, it's focused on building a relationship and learning about them and then being able to make those connections instead of starting with an ask. So some sample questions. The first question is basically referencing what you discussed in a previous interaction. So this is something that can be an upcoming trip, a new project. Like I mentioned, a child, if they have children, a child's event, they have a child, that might be something as a warm-up question to get them talking. I know that this next one, oftentimes, if you're meeting with these folks, or in my experience, they typically offer to connect me with someone. And I think this is a great way to thank them and offer the opportunity to introduce them or make that connection or really ask them for help. And I've always found that both in scheduling time for personal reasons as well as for professional networking, that if you can get something on the books, it's a lot easier to have to move that around than have to chase someone down to reschedule something. So if you enjoy the conversation, if you think that the other person enjoyed it, offer to see what the best way to get something on the books or schedule something for next month, next quarter, 6 months, whatever you think is an appropriate amount of time to check in with them. So see if you can both ask if that's okay and ideally schedule while you're there together. So this last step is sort of how do you re-engage some of those contacts, those relationships, and that's something that I think some of you are having trouble with, and I certainly still to this day is something that I have to think hard about. How do I continue to invest in these relationships, and sometimes when it's difficult. So again, this is where it comes to, you have notes from a previous meeting, so you have an idea of what to talk about, and a lot of the same questions are going to come up that come across between these two. But think about it when you haven't seen a friend for a while or a family member, like what are some of those types of questions that you ask about what's been going on in their life? I think it's pretty easy to think that you can talk about work, you can talk about their personal life, maybe what's going on in their family, if they've offered that information, or you can talk about yours, and maybe that'll create the opportunity for them to talk about theirs. Again, I think it's totally fine if you just want to catch up with them. State that in making the ask when you reach out to them. If otherwise, and you're interested in doing something that is maybe talking about a job or a company or a sales lead, I think it's important to also mention that in your outreach to them. And the 60-40 rule is something that I think is helpful, especially when trying to re-engage folks, is that so 60% of the relationship, 60% of the conversation, you want to be giving, you want to be listening, you want to be offering help, and that really only asking for 40% in return. And in actuality, if we both approach this conversation, this relationship that way, we're both going to be getting more than we ever thought that we might. So just be conscious of when you're asking for their time, when you're asking for pieces of advice as well as specific asks and actions. Try to keep that to the 60-40 rule where you're asking for less than you're giving more than you're asking for. And so sometimes that can be helpful. Again, depending on the relationship, that's not always appropriate. So I have some connections that people are very senior in my industry. And they can give me advice, they can make introductions and connections in ways that I can't ever repay that. And I recognize that. And so one way to do that is just be mindful that there are going to be people in your organization, in your industry, who are just going to be able to give more. And so being able to engage with them on social media, if they're there, or asking if they need anything is really a helpful way to give back in the times when you know that you might not be able to. So we are wrapping up the next couple of slides. We'll jump into some other questions that we have. But before we get there, I think in my reading and my research, as well as many conversations with clients and putting this PowerPoint together and previous ones, these are just some other questions that I have for you that'll provide resources as you're having those conversations, as you're networking and engaging folks. So, what is the most enjoyable aspect or least enjoyable, depending on what you're interested in knowing about working with a specific company or type of technology. And in this conversation, as you are trying to clarify your purpose, so when I think about purpose, it's meeting new people, it's searching for a job, it's trying to chase down a business lead or a sales lead, or it's learning about a new company or new organization. That's really the second question here. So as I'm pursuing this goal, how should I be spending my time? Is it individual coffee chats and one-on-ones? Is it reaching out to HR folks at specific companies? Is it networking events? Asking for their advice as you're going through with this process and really this purpose. Again, I already spoke about this one, but asking if there's anyone else that they should speak with or they can introduce you to. And these last two questions are more focused around job searching. Anyone hiring, any specific firms or individuals that are hiring that I should look at. So again, asking for their specific industry experience. And then the other one is, if you feel comfortable, know of any open roles at your company within a specific function or role. So hopefully that's helpful as you think through some of the examples that we talked about earlier. So this is one of the last pieces of advice that I have as a takeaway is as you're trying to deepen those relationships and focus really on that re-engaged population or that process or area. So see if you can learn about birthdays, milestones, celebrations. That's a great way. Send them a quick note or congratulate them when their anniversary comes up on LinkedIn, something like that. Something that you can see is if you met someone at a specific event, you can, and you see another event that's coming up, you can ask them if they're going or if you'd like to go together. If you're a company or if you're part of a group that's hosting an event where you think they might be interested in attending, feel free to invite them, offer them a ticket if that's something you would be able to do. Something that I've also found to be interesting is as you comb the news, as you read through these different publications, as you search and look for and sort of you come across these different trends and articles, feel free to share those with your contacts. Maybe not overwhelm them by sharing them all, very frequently, but maybe a quick note about saw this article, read through it, thought it was relevant to what you're working on, or reminded me of our conversation. It's something that maybe in my experience, people have appreciated. And then again, offer to make introductions or connections, or simply just make them. So sometimes that I've been in situations where I knew someone and there was a connection that I thought needed to be made and I just went ahead and made it. So again, that was something I was comfortable with both contacts, so I knew that they would be open to that. But again, those are just some other investing ways or tools that can help you figure out and take a creative approach to investing in your relationships. Finally, just a couple key reminders and key points as we wrap up the conversation today. Again, you need to start somewhere. It might seem complex and burdensome, or you're not entirely sure where to start, but hopefully with this, as well as the resources with the Graham School, you'll be able to just get going. And I like this line about giving as much as you expect, right? So oftentimes I think we have high expectations, and this sort of reminds me of the 60-40 rule, that if you're expecting that someone is going to be, sending you contacts, sending you jobs, working with you, give that back tenfold. So give as much to this relationship as that you're expecting to get out. And again, sort of you're going to do this, and sometimes it's going to work out great. So you're going to have these initial conversations. You're going to have coffee chats. You're going to be with people for drinks. And some of them will lead to relationships. Some of them will lead to short-term and long-term relationships. And then also some of these are not going to work out. They're not going to pan out. So for an example of earlier when I had mentioned the example that I used when I reached out to Morgan. So that morning I had contacted a couple different people, or rather I met a couple different people, and I sent a follow-up note offering to get together with one other person. That person accepted my LinkedIn invitation, but didn't do anything with my request to meet for coffee. So again, it's going to be okay. You're not going to be able to engage and capture and build relationships with everyone. And that's actually okay because we don't have that much time and energy to do that in a meaningful way. This next one is prune, renew, and or reshape your network. So this is something that as you're going to go through and evaluate the relationships, the amount of time, the limited time that you have to engage and invest in them is something that you're going to have to figure out if it makes sense. You might be scaling back in some cases. You might be scaling up in other places. And that's okay as you figure out how much time you have to allocate these different relationships. And lastly, you want to be curious, you want to be interested, you want to ask questions, and you want to seem like you are engaged in the other person's life, and then it's not just all about you. So with that, I think we have about 10 to 12 minutes or 14 minutes rather to answer any questions that you have. I know I ran through a number of different ideas and thoughts. So you can post your question in the chat box. I'm happy to go back and talk through anything that I already discussed. Or I think even Lisa, we can unmute some folks and they can ask their questions that way. But thank you for listening today. And feel free to reach out to me at this email address if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Tyler. Yeah, we'll stay on for about 15 minutes for people to ask questions. So feel free to chat them, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions as you go. Oh, and as a note, I always forget, I am sending out a survey about this webinar at the afterwards. So if you can fill that out, that will really help us as we do different webinars moving forward.
Great. And there's a question in the box about meeting up with someone at a company you're interviewing for and the interview hasn't taken place. So I think in general, I don't see any harm with that. I think it depends on who you're meeting with and where you are in their interview process. So if you have contacts who work at a specific company that you've submitted an application to, I think it's okay to chat with them. They can definitely help you prep for the interview and help with those conversations. I don't know, and again, it depends on the specific interview and the company for what their preferences are, and is it that they're willing to talk to anyone and you can engage with any folks or anyone on the HR team, or if it's a very sort of closed door policy. But I would say in general, it's okay to engage existing contacts that you have when it comes to interviewing for a job, and that's my advice with that one. Hopefully that helps. I think the next question is about networking with recruiters, and that with the way that the system is currently designed, that there are both parameters and sort of artificial intelligence that helps select the candidates based off of criteria. I think when it comes to networking with recruiters, it is about establishing a relationship. And so, both of you being honest about what you're looking for, I think you can reach out to recruiters on LinkedIn, and they may or may not accept you. I don't have substantive work experience or a lot of work with recruiters. They definitely reach out, but I haven't had a ton of work with them. Sorry about that. Hopefully that is somewhat helpful, but sorry I don't have as many tips. Email thank yous are great. So I highly recommend them, especially after a job interview. I think it depends on a couple different things. So first is where you are in the process. So if thank you emails are great for phone interviews and sort of everything leading up until an in-person interview. And then also the timeline. So if someone says, that you meet with them on a Monday and they plan to have an answer to you, within 3 days, it might not have it might not be the best option to wait on snail mail. But if they say it'll be 1 to 2 weeks, plenty of time for the invitation to get back to them. That's when I recommend a mailed letter. So it kind of depends. I like both, and I like doing it individually. So that's my advice with that. Do you have any additional strategies for re-engaging with connections who live at a distance and in person is not available? Yeah, so I think one of the first things that comes to mind is seeing if they're open to a phone call or open to a video chat. And again, I think it depends on the relationship and it depends on what that ask is. But I would see if they were open to a phone call. And even if someone who lives nearby and reaching out to schedule a phone call, certainly not as impactful or valuable as seeing them face to face. But that also might be something where you can offer to do a FaceTime or a Skype. And I think even acknowledging that you don't live in the same area, that you aren't able to connect with them in person, and putting that out there first. I think this way you're sort of both acknowledging what might be a small elephant in the room. I think that I certainly would be receptive to that. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, so more questions about what we can give in the get together. Yep. So I think for me, it is sort of a couple of things come to mind. The first one is certainly offering to make any connections for them, figuring out what they're looking for, what they're searching for. Maybe they're looking for a new job or looking to join a board. Those are some things that come to mind. So offering to make connections, figuring out where they are in their career and what that next step is, and if there's any way that you can help. That's another thing that comes to mind. I would say outside of that specific get together and just remembering things from previous conversations, I would say if they engage with them digitally, so if they were featured in a magazine or have some sort of digital activity going on, you can share that. I think those are some of the main ways in terms of balancing that 60-40. I think part of it is also engaging and sharing with them the articles and or other relevant information that pertains to their industry. Hopefully that helps in answering that. So in terms of writing a great LinkedIn profile, so I would say one of the great things about LinkedIn is that it walks you through the various steps of the different pieces that you need to set up what they consider an all-star or good profile. I think for me, it's a professional photo. It is that background cover photo. I think it's having a good headline and then a biography section. Doesn't have to be, extensive, but I think setting up a biography position would be really helpful. And then at least 1 or 2 lines about the company that you worked for and the position that you held. Those are some great ways. I know that there's more tips that I have that breaks down exactly what the section should contain. And I know Lisa will be able to send out the link to you for the LinkedIn chat. Another question is the given question. How do you give in if someone is helping you out and they're in a C-suite position, then it mostly seems like you're the taker and anything to offer? Totally get that. And that's something that I still continue to work through. I would say a couple things. One, I think recognizing that they're in a position where they're able to give more is the first step, right? So for you, recognizing that it's not so much that you're a taker, it's just that you're able to offer different things. I think continuing to ask if you can help with anything, and even acknowledging that, right? Saying something like, your support is, you generously support me and continue to connect me with these folks and mentor me or help me in these ways. I recognize that I can't give back to you or help you in the same way. Is there anything else that I can do to help you with that? And sometimes love an answer to that. Most of the time what I've found, and this is a personal philosophy that I've adopted, is that I will be able to pay it forward. So I might not be able to help the person above me or laterally who's able to help me in the same way, but that I'm committed to paying it forward. And oftentimes that is what these C-suite type folks have experienced. So they've had a mentor or someone who's really coached them and helped them along the way. And so they're then in turn paying it forward. That's how I would approach it and how I have approached and certainly advised my different clients on that situation. Hopefully that helps.
Awesome. So me and Tyler will stay on here for about 5 more minutes. If you guys want to ask private questions or anything, I will send out the recording and the slides about 24 hours after this goes out. You'll get it in your email. I'll send out the LinkedIn webinar as well. And if I should put my email in case you have questions about programs or want any information. But anyway, thank you guys so much for attending. Please be sure to fill out our survey so we can get more ideas for what kind of webinars you would like to see offered next.
Great. Yeah, and if you have any questions that you didn't think of during this conversation, and you're reviewing the slides or taking the survey, please feel free to reach out to me at this email address. Welcome to continue the conversation. And if there are any other ideas or topics you're curious of, please fill out the survey. It's something that Lisa and I have reviewed every time after each one of these conversations to plan the next one. And as we think about future sessions and what that looks like, would love to really be able to help you. So thank you.